everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my January wrap-up. So we're back to a monthly wrap-up and see how it goes, because last year I only did quarterly wrap-ups. But in January, I didn't get a lot of reading done. I finished 4 books. All of them were pretty short. But before getting into those, I have a update on my TBR clear-out project. So if you haven't seen my TBR clear out project video, I will link it in the description. Essentially, it is just, I looked at all of the physical books on my shelf and all of the books that have been on there the longest, which for the most part are books that I bought in 2021. And my goal is to clear out all of the oldest books on my shelf this year, whether I read them, DNF them, or unhaul them. One way or another, I want to get them off my shelves. So in January, I wanted to kind of start the year off strong, try out a book, make some decisions, that kind of thing. So I have 2 books here that I have updates on. One is just an unhaul. So I decided I am going to unhaul Rhapsody by Elizabeth Hayden. So I have not read this at all, but I don't think that I am going to. So this is one that I had like a vague memory of like hearing negative reviews for this. So I went back and did a little bit more research on kind of people's opinions of this book and the series as a whole. Some people do seem to really love it, but a lot of people seem to agree that the main character is extremely annoying and that while the first couple books are pretty good, the series goes downhill as it continues. And that just doesn't necessarily seem like something I want to get invested in if the series is going to like go in a downhill trajectory. Also, just reading the description of it, I just think my interest in this has kind of waned over time, so I decided to just let this one go. I did DNF another book. So this one I actually tried reading and I got, I think, about a quarter of the way into it before DNFing, so I gave it a good shot, but it was The Empire's Ghost by Isabel Steiger. This one I really thought I was going to like. It sounded like it was going to be a lot of fun, but I just could not get into this book. How far did I get into this? I got like 117 pages into this, so I feel like I gave it a good shot. But I just really wasn't getting along with not the writing, but more of like the storytelling style of this. I felt like the author introduced too many, POVs and plot lines too quickly with very little context as to who these people were and why we should care about them. But I think the bigger issue for me in this instance is that I didn't feel like the author wrote very good character hooks. So as I was reading this, I definitely got the feeling that this was meant to be like a real character's book, right? It's about this like band of misfits who are kind of outside the law, who end up being like sent on this quest together. And they're supposed to be these characters that you like them. And, I think she was trying to set up their relationships and dynamics, but I just didn't feel like it was very successful. I didn't feel like any of the characters really hooked me. I didn't feel like they were very interesting. I didn't buy into the, relationship dynamics between these characters. It just really fell flat for me. The writing in this, I didn't think in general was bad, but it wasn't anything in particular, except for the dialogue. The dialogue in this was so tedious to read. Anyway, I DNF'd this. So, I guess the update is positive in that I made some progress already on my TBR clear out project. 2 books have come off the TBR, but not the most auspicious start in terms of my feelings about the books. Anyways, let's get into what I actually finished in January. So first up, we have Calling on Dragons and Talking to Dragons by Patricia C. Reedy. I read this one at the beginning of the month and this one at the end of the month, but I'm just gonna pair them together. So these are the third and fourth book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles. This is a middle grade fantasy that I loved as a kid. And the series starts out following a princess named Cimarine who does not want to be forced into a marriage, and so she runs away, finds dragons, and becomes the princess of one of these dragons. She gets kind of more involved in dragon culture and politics, finds a conspiracy, all of this. Each book in the series then follows the same group of characters, but tells the story from a different character perspective. So the first one is from Cimarine's perspective. The second one is from Mendenbar, who is the king of the Enchanted Forest. The third book, Calling on Dragons, is told from the perspective of Morwen, who is a witch that we have met in previous books and is a friend of Cimarine's. And then the final book is Talking to Dragons, and this one is told from the perspective of one of the children of characters from the previous books. So these all involve the same group of characters, but each one's kind of told from a different POV. Yeah, and these are just very fun. Like, these are very nostalgic for me. I loved these books as a kid. I had a dragon stuffed animal that I named after one of the dragons in these books. So I was very obsessed with them. But they're very fun, and they're just kind of like light and funny, and I had a great time reading them. So this was the first book that I read in January, and so it was a nice way to start off the year with something that I knew I was going to enjoy, which is kind of my strategy every year. Usually it is to either reread an old favorite or to read like a new book from an author I already know I love, just to start the year off on the right foot. But yeah, so I gave these, I think each of these got 4 stars, and they were very fun to read. Next I read Year of the Reaper by Makia Lucier. And this, I feel like this keeps happening where there are books that I don't have a plan to read them anytime soon, and then I just kind of decide one day, like, you know what, I'm just gonna grab this off my TBR shelf and I'm gonna give it a shot. And then I have a great time. That happened last year, especially towards the end of the year. Some of my favorite books were ones that I hadn't been planning to read, and then I just sort of picked them up on a whim. This one also picked it up on a whim, had a great time, and was just very surprised by how much I enjoyed this. So this one is a standalone YA fantasy. In this, we are following Cass, who is the son of like a noble family. But for the last like 3 or 4 years, he has been in a enemy work camp prison because he was essentially kidnapped off the road by soldiers from this country that like his country is at war with. They put him in this work camp. They didn't believe him that who he was, so they didn't try to ransom him. But he has finally escaped because he survived. He was the only survivor in this camp of the plague. So the last few years, both countries, like everybody has been dealing with this horrible plague that has been killing people. And it is incredibly rare for somebody to survive the plague. And so when this prison that he was in got like infected with the plague, he was pretty much the only person who survived and was able to just kind of sneak out and get away. So at this point, he's making his way home at the beginning of this book. For the most part, the plague has, dissipated and is not really affecting them anymore, although people are still being cautious. But he gets home and finds that a lot of things have changed, particularly finding that many members of his family have died, and that the king and queen are in residence, that they are living in his family home, which is not normally where they live. They live in a different city. And right when Cass gets there, he stops an assassination attempt. And from there, the plot kind of starts to come together of really him and others trying to figure out who is trying to assassinate people, and particularly members of the royal family and those connected to them, and also why, and that this might have some connection to the royal families or members of the royal family's past. And so that's what we're following in this story, is Cass trying to discover who and why there are assassination attempts. And of course there is a little bit of a romance in this as well. It's not, you know, the central story, but I did enjoy that aspect of it as well. And I just ended up really liking this. I thought that like the characters were really interesting and engaging. I just really liked all of them. I enjoyed the different character dynamics. I think the mystery aspect of this was very good, because I'm not always a mystery person, and so I feel like the balance between like the character relationships and the mystery elements of the story were really good and just really well balanced for me to keep me engaged and interested in the story and the mystery aspect. The story definitely like went in a direction that I had not been anticipating with one like element of the story, but yeah, I had a really good time with this. I thought it was really interesting. I was not expecting it to be like a plague book, especially, you know, since everything with COVID, I've kind of been avoiding books that involve plagues, but I didn't think that this one focused too heavily on the plague, or at least because it's more like post-plague. It's not like at the height of it, so to me it was fine for me, even though that's something I've kind of been avoiding. But also I felt like this was just really well paced, because this is a standalone fantasy and it's not very long. It's like 300 and something pages, or it might be practically like 300 pages flat. But I just felt like the story, the character relationships, all of it was just really well paced, and I enjoyed this so much, and I was so surprised, and now I want to read more from this author. But yeah, so I think I gave this 4.5 stars. This was probably my favorite thing that I read in January, and it was such a surprise because I just picked it up on a whim. All right, and then the last book that I read in January was Adrift on Currents Clean and Clear by Sean McGuire, continuing the tradition of reading the Wayward Children, the next Wayward Children book at the beginning of the year. I listened to this as an audiobook. I believe this is the final book in the Wayward Children series. And in this one, we're following Nadia, who we have met in previous books, but this is her story where we get to learn about the magical world that she goes to. And in this one, she goes to a world of water and turtles, which I think I did enjoy the world that she went to. I think that there was a lot of like creativity in the type of world that was created. I just think that for me personally, at least, this series has kind of lost its sparkle a little bit. I really loved the first few books of the series, but as the series has gone on, like, I just haven't enjoyed the later books as much. As far as I know, this is the final book in the series, but it didn't like wrap things up in any way. There was no real conclusion to it. It was just sort of another installment. And I would have liked some kind of like unifying conclusion or something. It sort of seems like an odd choice to end on an even number, because in the series in general, it's like every other book, the odd numbers are following the main plot line of what's happening at the home for wayward children, and that is sort of like the connecting piece. And then the even numbers are more like one-off stories of individual characters and the magical worlds that they travel to. So it also just would have made more sense to me for it to end on an odd number book where it was able to kind of like tie together that like connecting plot line of the Home for Wayward Children. I do like what Seanan McGuire is doing conceptually with the series, but I don't know, I just feel like the series has kind of lost its magic for me a little bit as it has gone on. But I also think that that may not be the case for other people. So I don't know, this one was okay. It was fine. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars. So those were all of the books that I read in January. I actually did a lot more reading than that because in January, I kept picking up and putting down books. So there were at least like 3 other books that I got like 100 to 150 pages into them before like putting them down, just pausing them, not DNFing them. So I feel like I was reading a lot more and reading very consistently, but I only finished these 4. But I would love to know how your first month of reading in 2025 went, and do you feel like you started off the year with a good read? But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.